Okay, now we are going to cover the fascinating case of Philip G. Strong, who was a CIA chief director of intelligence, but he started out in the Marines as a commissioned intelligence officer, and then he switched to the State Department and then to the CIA. And physics professor Dr. James E. McDonald made a big stink about Philip G. Strong being a CIA cover-up. And what happened is that well, let's get into the details. It gets a bit complicated, but when we look at the obit of Philip G. Strong, it refers to him developing revolutionary reconnaissance vehicles. And this, I'm arguing that this goes all the way back to the Robertson panel that was convened by the CIA to investigate UFOs. But as James E. McDonald argued, it was actually a cover-up. Now, James E. McDonald came to believe that the UFOs had to be extraterrestrial, but he considered that he did not dismiss the idea that it could be some kind of secret technology from Earth. And so let's get into the details. What I did is I dug deep into the CIA archives, and first we start off with a talk by physics professor James E. McDonald. It's on YouTube, and he's very passionate about the fact that the CIA is covered up.
We are most NICAP's official position is that there must be a high-level cover-up.
Okay, so
at Northwestern, and if you have...
Okay, so he goes on for over an hour about this, and he names Philip G. Strong, so he's not afraid to name names. Now, when we look at the CIA letters, we find Philip G. Strong contacting people who were on this Robertson panel, and the CIA did not want to be associated with the panel, so they said you need to hide the fact that the CIA organized the panel and was behind it. Now, what's interesting about this is that if you look at the history of government panels that are convened to investigate issues, you find that they're obviously constructed as cover-ups. When you look at the people who are on the committee to investigate 9/11 or to investigate the JFK assassination. And so my claim is that Professor James E. McDonald was completely correct that the Robertson panel was a cover-up. But my claim is that what it was covering up was precisely this revolutionary reconnaissance vehicles that people were seeing as what they thought to be UFOs. And we can come to that conclusion by looking at who was on the Robertson panel. And the most prominent scientist on the panel is a physicist who was working at Brookhaven National Labs. And so first we get into the reports that McDonald was investigating, and then how he's naming Philip J. Strong as sort of their cover-up. And so when we look at what Strong actually did when he wasn't covering up these UFO sightings, he was directly involved with the development of high-altitude reconnaissance aircraft, working with the Air Force. And so this craft in particular is a prototype of the U-2 aircraft. It's an earlier version of it. But the thing is that when we look at who was on the committee, here's Strong himself. He started out as a colonel in the Marine Corps in intelligence, and he advanced to rank of brigadier general in the reserves. So he has strong contacts with the Air Force. And so then he became director, or he worked in intelligence, so he worked directly with the director of the CIA, of Central Intelligence. And he was basically like chief of intelligence, of the scientific intelligence at the CIA, chief of collection. So this design is a jet-propelled glider as a revolutionary reconnaissance aircraft. Now, when we look at his cover-up of the UFO sightings, the Robertson panel that he convened, as I mentioned, the most prominent member is actually this fellow here, Dr. Samuel A. Goudsmit, who was working at Brookhaven National Labs. It turns out that he left Germany in 1927 to do research in the U.S., and he and another scientist were the very first to coin the concept, to discover the concept of spin, of quantum spin, which is like a very important. He's basically one of the founders of quantum physics, which I wasn't aware of him, which is kind of strange, but he was also, obviously deeply involved in military research in the U.S. as well as a physicist. So here he's referring to Ted Norbeck, who's another CIA officer. And so basically Strong got Goudsmit to be on this UFO panel, but Goudsmit was already working with the military on, it turns out he was sent over to Nazi Germany as the front of the pursuing the Nazi scientists for what later became Operation Paperclip. So that's going to be crucial to the fact that he was then put on the Robertson panel to investigate UFOs. And so here we have just the praise of General Strong, Brigadier General Philip Strong. and as being a high-level intelligence chairman of critical collection problems. So we can see how this would be related to not just UFO research, obviously, but to any kind of revolutionary aircraft research. So here we have a letter from Philip G. Strong again about the Robertson panel. After its deliberation, the panel reached two conclusions. Very recently, the Air Force has requested that the conclusions of this report be declassified. I have discussed this matter with Dr. Goudsmit, who agree that the conclusions can be declassified, but they, as well as this agency, the CIA, will not agree to a declassification of the conclusion of paragraph 3 or the recommendation in paragraph 4B. It is our feeling that the association of the panel with the CIA should not be disclosed. So here you have, you have proof that Philip G. Strong is hiding secrets as for his CIA work. And so he's also one of the members of the Committee of Overhead Reconnaissance, which again is, that would be tied to unidentified flying objects, or it would be tied to revolutionary aircraft, secret military technology. And so here we have, he worked closely with the National Security Council on intelligence, and he was in naval intelligence and was in the CIA for 15 years in senior positions of intelligence, chief intelligence officer, and then in the State Department in between. Okay, so then you have this prominent atmospheric physicist, Dr. McDonald, and he's pointing out that this there was originally a big flood of UFO reports to U.S. air bases, and so what happens is they make it a crime of imprisonment up to 10 years or a fine of $10,000 if you release any of the information on UFO sightings from any military service or, some cases, commercial airlines. So all of a sudden, all these sightings got covered up. And of course, he thinks that, they must be from outer space, but he's an atmospheric scientist, and so he doesn't dismiss the idea that they could be secret technology. But obviously, he doesn't realize that the physicist on the Robertson panel was in charge of seeking out the German scientists for the Nazis. Like, he was sent over by the U.S. to Nazi Germany. So, So, okay. So basically, the scientific head of the mission was a Dutch-American physicist named Samuel A. Goudsmit. The mission codename is Alsos. And so he was the first Allied scientist to interrogate the captured physicists. Now, obviously, that would mean he would discover a lot of their secrets of what they were working on. And so Philip Strong wrote to Goudsmit at Brookhaven Laboratory. And they're talking about the problem of the public, or in a particular people being fanatical about trying to find out the truth of UFOs and thinking that they must be extraterrestrials and stuff. But of course, these letters they don't go into these military secrets. But we know that Goudsmit was directly involved with the military secrets of Nazi Germany that were then brought back to the US as Operation Paperclip. So is it just a coincidence that Strong also was key to developing revolutionary reconnaissance craft, and he's closely involved with Goudsmit, who also was tied to the German technology, whatever their secrets were. So there's a lot of speculation about what the Germans were developing, and Heisenberg supposedly sabotaged the German nuclear bomb development. And so for example, in 2019, somebody released the CIA UFO papers. So what they're doing is they're searching the archives like I did, and they're finding every document that refers to UFOs. But what I'm providing here in this video is an analysis of the connections. In other words, you have to look into the backgrounds of Dr. Samuel Goudsmit and why he was on the Robertson panel and what that means in relation to Philip Strong and what the cover-up was really about. And so it's not just about UFOs, it's about Philip Strong also being an expert in developing revolutionary reconnaissance aircraft. So what happened is that the Office of Naval Research funded physics professor McDonald to conduct his own UFO research because he was an atmospheric physicist, and so he was going to explain that UFOs were actually misidentified clouds, and that's would fit with what the military would want to project to the public. So because of that connection, he was given access to the Project Blue Book at Wright-Patterson Air Force. And that was the government investigation. But so then he concluded that the Air Force was mishandling the evidence and covering it up. And so that's when he realized that Philip G. Strong was the linchpin of this cover-up. And why is that? Because Philip G. Strong sent out these memos to the people on the Robertson panel that they should direct all inquiries to the Air Force instead of the CIA, even though the CIA had organized the investigation of the UFO phenomenon through the Robertson panel. And so McDonald saw that as part of the cover-up, because when he read the Project Blue Book files, he realized that the testimonials were valid sightings of some kind of unidentified flying objects. And so when you look at what Samuel Goudsmit did in his public testimony about his work with the military in Nazi Germany, it's kind of hard to explain. Like, there's a lot of contradictions, and it seems that he obviously is covering up secret technology, and so then part of the Robertson panel investigation or recommendation was that the CIA needed to keep an eye on to monitor these other citizen groups that were researching UFOs, because the CIA was afraid that those citizen groups would then get targeted by foreign intelligence as spies in the US. And so the Robertson panel routinely referred to these other citizen groups investigating UFOs as crackpot organizations or the lunatic fringe. In other words, they're just dismissing them. And why would they be so dismissive? Because obviously, if they might be discovering actual military technology. And so it's better to try to dismiss these revolutionary aircraft with stories about how people are confused and delusional and crackpots, lunatics. And so here we have the recent sightings of the TR-3B craft, which is an equilateral triangle craft with no fuselage. And I personally saw this craft in 1997, and I saw it so close that I could have hit it with a rock. And it flew right over the north edge of our lawn, over the big oak tree, and then over our garage. It made a loud low humming noise, and I looked up the sightings of the triangle craft on the National UFO Reporting Center, and there was over a dozen sightings of the craft being accompanied by military jets or helicopters. And this person saw the craft at the Tyndall Air Force Base, which is working closely with the U.S. Space Force. And one of the sightings had the craft go overhead, and they saw an insignia on the bottom of the craft. And they described the insignia, and somebody else recognized it as the U.S. Space Innovation Center in Colorado. And so when you investigate, is the TR-3B a real thing? Okay, here we have another letter from Philip G. Strong. He's saying that he's referring to the lunatic fringe that thinks UFOs are from outer space, and he's writing to somebody from the Air Force who wrote a book against UFOs, and he's basically saying, people will never be really convinced of the Air Force objectiveness and forthrightness on this subject. So the problem is that Philip G. Strong is telling people to, cover up the fact that the CIA is involved, and he's also obviously hiding the fact that he's involved with secret revolutionary aircraft development. And so another thing that Philip G. Strong was involved with was the collection of foreign intelligence information in the U.S. Through the CIA. So obviously that'd be why he was concerned with how these UFO citizen groups could then get targeted as a source of information for foreign intelligence. So then finally, when we get a close examination of this equilateral triangle craft, we find that a prototype was actually built in 1978 from a Norcraft design, and so it's a equilateral triangle craft, just like the one that I saw and that's been seen in my area before, because the journalist for the legal paper in my area, which happened to be owned by my parents at the time, and it was actually after they owned it, or no, I think they still owned it, but anyway, she brought me a packet of articles from the local area of the same craft seen in the 1970s. But fascinatingly, the UFO researcher Nick Redfern cites his dad in the military in England seeing this same craft as part of a NATO operation. I think it was called like Operation Brace Force or something like that. Main Brace. And I think I have on my blog the response that Nick Redfern sent me, corroborating that this craft existed in 1952. So then it turns out that, sure enough, in Germany they had developed a wingless triangle craft called the Horten that had a prototype. It was the first jet engine craft, but it was a triangle-shaped craft, and the prototype was brought over back into the U.S. under Operation Paperclip, which means that this also mission that was directly supervised by the Dutch physicist who went over there to Germany, assuming he spoke German, Samuel Goudsmit. He would have known about this Horten flying wing that was brought back as part of Operation Paperclip, because the ALSO's mission identified the key scientists and engineers who were later recruited through Operation Paperclip. So that brings us full circle, proving that not only was the Robertson panel a cover-up, but that the people on the panel were directly involved in revolutionary reconnaissance aircraft that would have been considered to be UFOs by the people that had seen them, but obviously had to be kept secret, and that Philip G. Strong was directly involved in this cover-up to keep them secret. And so it's a fascinating mystery behind the connection to the Nazi aircraft and the Operation Paperclip, the CIA working with the Nazis, and the cover-up that then developed. So if we search my blog, Revolutionary. Okay, so right here we have, right in his obit in the New York Times, it says he was involved in the innovative concept of revolutionary reconnaissance vehicles. And so then they mention the U-2, but they don't mention the Horton wing, obviously, because it's still secret. It got developed into this later craft, into later models of it, but it was first seen in 1952, which would explain why there was this huge increase of sightings of UFOs in 1952. And let's see. Yeah, so that's the obit. It was 1971. That was the year I was born. So to me, this solves a big mystery of the whole UFO research. And then, of course, you had the later versions where the extraterrestrial disinformation just kept getting worse and worse. It was spread by the military disinformation. That's been documented in the research of Greg Bishop on Project Beta. But this is the original version of it right after World War II. And Nick Redfern has an excellent book on this about the Roswell sighting that called the Body Snatchers of the Desert in the Desert. And he worked with Greg Bishop also. So I feel very glad to have. I heard that Professor McDonald had researched global warming in the 1950s, and that made me intrigued. But it turned out he was more researching like weather control or weather manipulation and aerosol masking effect, stuff like that. And so McDonald discovered the CIA order with the notation that its role not be disclosed. So that's what we just found in the archives, the CIA archive. McDonald said the order was attached to a book of UFO investigations compiled by scientists and called the Robertson Report. Completed in 1953, some of the report was later declassified. But McDonald noted that only 3 of the 4 sections were declassified. And then when he tried to follow up, suddenly they got reclassified. Then he said, okay, so they don't want people, realizing they don't want any kind of connection to this secret reconnaissance. So he says that there are reconnaissance missions from outer space, but actually they're reconnaissance missions from the U.S. to, so like these triangle craft, they've been seen operating in the first Gulf, and the first U.S. invasion of Iraq in 1991. And they've been seen, if you go to that UFO, I've uploaded a bunch of videos about the triangle craft. And I even corroborated the claims of Ed Fouché about the gravity cancellation technology using the superconducting mercury. I found research about that being conducted by the Air Force in conjunction with magnetohydrodynamic propulsion. Anyway, so I feel confident that this is what was really going on, that there was a secret connection between Samuel Goudsmit and Philip Strong about this Horton wing revolutionary reconnaissance aircraft that then later got further developed